Okay, section 4.7 continued. This is part 2. Let's now go to rule 6, or little rule, little tip, little convention. What if you have an ordinary statement that has non-standard quantifiers? Okay, instead of all, no, or some, it has few, a few, not every. Where up here with number 5, they were just unexpressed, and you could look at what the intended meaning was and put all, no, or some in there. Here you have something expressed, but they're non-standard. Few, a few, not every. They're expressed, but they're not your typical quantifiers. So get the intended meaning. Getting the meaning is very important, and re-express using the standard quantifiers. And remember, there is no all S or not P. That was from the first part 1 of 4.7. So translate this kind of statement, depending on its meaning, into no S or P. Or, just be careful. If you have an affirmative, if you have a negative, you got to just make sure the negative is in the proper negative type of categorical proposition. Okay. All right. A few soldiers are heroes. Now, when you look at that, here we have a few. And we've got a subject class, we've got a copula, we've got a predicate class, but a few, what do they mean by a few soldiers or heroes? Of course, they mean all. Okay, no, I'm sorry, they don't mean all. When they say a few, they don't mean all, they mean some. So you would say some soldiers are heroes. Okay, so that's what you do there. A few soldiers are heroes, they mean some. Okay, anyone who votes is a citizen. All right, so what do they mean by anyone? They mean all, right? All who vote, or all voters, let's just do that. All voters are citizens. Okay, I think we got one more example here. All prisoners are not violent. So if someone is having a talk with you and they say, look, Joe, all prisoners are not violent, what do they mean by that? They really mean some prisoners are not violent people. Okay? So that's what you've got to do here. Alright, so you express it in what they really mean there. Okay? And this would be a for some prisoners are not violent. The reason this is, even though all, no, or some are standard ones, this is expressed, but it's it's not in the it's in a non-standard form, because if usually you have some with this. If you have a quantifier with S, R, not P, it's usually some. So this is why they call this non-standard, even though it's all, and we've seen it before. All does not go with an S, R, not P. Usually some does. Okay? So you remember, it's just getting the meaning. All prisoners are not violent. That means some prisoners are not violent. Okay. All right, let's go to 7, and this is conditional statements. This is very important with conditional statements. Translate conditional statements into universals. Meaning, an all, or if the consequent is negated, a negative consequent, then you're going to translate that into an E statement. So you would use no, and these are universal statements, right? So let's say you had something like this. If it is a dog, then it's an animal. If it's a dog, then it's an animal. Can't you see that you can translate that into all dogs are animals? Because before you said, if it's a dog, then I know it's an animal. So the universal would be all dogs are animals. Okay? And if you have a negated consequent, like If it's a dog, then it's not a two-legged animal. You're going to translate that into an E statement, which is still a universal. So if you have an if-then, a conditional, and only if you see that, that's a conditional too, you can translate those into universals. Now there's a couple rules here, and it's right there. If you see the word, the little word if, the subject follows. But if you see only if, the predicate follows. And you've got to be careful. Only if is different than if. I don't want you to see the if and go, oh, the subject follows. No, this is only if. That is a different phrase than if, and it has some differences in translation. If you see if by itself, the subject follows. If you see only if, okay, the predicate follows. And then the last little rule here before we translate a few. If you see a statement that has the word unless, which means if not, with the word unless, they're translated. Let me go ahead and read this. Also, statements with the word unless are translated with the term following it unless re-expressed as the subject term that is made to be the opposite of the original way the term was expressed. So you know what? Just because I just read that, why don't we go down here and do this one first, okay? So let's do this. Tomatoes are edible unless they are spoiled, which can be if not. And here's what the rule says. So if you see unless, you know you're going to use this rule. Statements with the word unless are translated with the term following unless, spoiled tomatoes in a sense, re-expressed as the subject. So spoiled tomatoes is going to come over here and be the subject, right? And you're going to re-express it has to be made the opposite of the original way. So instead of it being spoiled tomatoes, it's going to be unspoiled, okay? So the term following unless, you're going to re-express it as the opposite, but it's going to become the subject term, okay? So with that said, how are we going to put this into categorical form? And you would do something like this. Now remember, unless, if not, this is a conditional. We're going to turn it into a universal. So what you would want to say is all unspoiled tomatoes, unspoiled. So the word following unless, it was spoiled tomatoes, you bring it over, it becomes the subject, and you make it the opposite, right? All unspoiled tomatoes are edible tomatoes. Okay, so we kind of took care of this rule. Okay, we're still dealing with conditionals. So if you see if, only if, and if you see unless, we're dealing with a conditional. This is a conditional. Now you're still going to turn it into a universal. But the way you do it with unless is whatever follows unless, which is spoiled tomatoes, that's kind of the predicate, right? That now is going to become the subject, but you're going to make it the opposite. So if it's spoiled tomatoes, it's going to become unspoiled tomatoes, and you're turning it into a universal. That doesn't change. So all unspoiled tomatoes are edible tomatoes. Okay, and that's how you will take care of that one. So edible tomatoes, this becomes the predicate because you're moving this over to become the subject by changing, making it the opposite, from spoiled to unspoiled. So all unspoiled tomatoes are edible tomatoes. Okay, let's go back up to here. If it is a mouse, then it is a mammal. Okay, this is a conditional. We have the if, and we know what follows the if is the subject, right? So we're going to turn this into a universal, and we basically say all mice are mammals. Okay, no more difficult than that. All mice are mammals. So if it's a mouse, then it's a mammal. It's a conditional. We can turn a conditional into a universal. And it's if the subject term follows. So mouse, if we say all mice, there's your subject term. Then it's a mammal. That hasn't changed. We've got our copula. We've got our quantifier. Okay, here's one. Jewelry is expensive if it is made of gold. Okay, here's the if here, right? So it's not only if, the subject term is going to follow. So this is a conditional. We want to change it into a universal. So we'd say something like this. All jewelry made of gold, okay? All jewelry made of gold is or are is jewelry that is expensive. Okay, now here, that if, the subject follows that. So when you convert the conditional to a universal, this has to be your subject class. And basically, it's talking about jewelry made of gold. So all gold jewelry or jewelry made of gold is or are expensive types of jewelry. You could say is jewelry that is expensive, or you could say are expensive types of jewelry. Okay, we could write that in there too if you're more comfortable. Are jewelry pieces let's say this, are expensive jewelry pieces. Okay, all right, that's getting a little confusing there, but you get the point. Let me erase that to clean that up here. Okay, and let's maybe go with this one because we can stay with the are, but you could have used the is. You know, you reword this any way that you're comfortable with that preserves the meaning. So all jewelry made of gold are expensive jewelry pieces. Okay, let's get that there. Expensive jewelry pieces. Okay, so there you go. All right, let's do this last one. If it is a turkey, then it is not a mammal. Okay, now this has a negative consequent, right? Now here's if, so turkey is still going to be the subject, but we change this to an is statement, all right? So this would be no, and this is still a universal. You take a conditional, take it to a universal, because of the negative consequent. You know, if, then, the consequent follows the then, we'll use an is statement. So no turkeys are mammals. And you know what? You got this from your book, but I probably should have said this right here at the beginning. If you have an if-then, if P, then Q, you know, that's how you would symbolize it and say it. The statement or term before this horseshoe, that's called the antecedent. And the statement that is to the right of the horseshoe, after the horseshoe, is called the consequent. Okay, so I've been using antecedent and consequent. I'm assuming if you read the book you knew what that meant, but just in case you didn't. So right here, if the subject term follows, that would be the antecedent here, then it is not a mammal. Okay, well, you knew up here, subject term, if follow, you know, the subject follows if, the predicate follows only if, but in when we get to real conditionals, they're going to call this term before the horseshoe the conditional operator, the antecedent, and afterwards they're going to call it the consequent, and they'll start using those terms. Okay, so this is for later on, but I think I've been slipping that term in a little bit. Anyway, okay, let's go to the next rule here. Okay, exclusive propositions, and we just got two more. So if you see only, none but, none except, no except, the predicate terms will follow these exclusive phrases upon translation. So the predicate term is going to follow. So here we see an only, this exclusive proposition. This means elected officials is going to be the predicate, and those attending the convention, that's going to be the subject. So it's a conditional. We want to make it a universal. So what this is going to be is all people who will attend the convention. So all people who will attend the convention. Okay? See, only right there, the predicate follows. So the subject term is going to be people who will attend the convention. All people who will attend the convention are people who are elected officials. Or you could say are elected officials, okay, for something shorter. And this preserves the meaning. Okay, if we did it the other way and said all elected officials are people who will attend the convention, that's not what this sentence is saying. It's not saying every single elected official in the area is going to be at the convention. It just says those that are there, all people who will attend the convention, they're going to be elected officials. So this predicate, following only, it makes sense. So trust the rules, okay? And then we have one more example. If you see the only is different from only. The subject term will follow this phrase in translation, okay? The only animals, so animals is going to be the subject. Animals that live in this canyon are skunks, that's the predicate. But this thing here, animals that live in the canyon, is the subject term, because the subject term follows the only. You turn it into a universal and you say all animals that live in this canyon, so all animals that live in this canyon are skunks or skunk animals. Okay? Pretty simple there, but here that rule, subject term follows the only. If you have only up here in these other exclusive propositions, the predicate term follows. Okay? And then one more for 9, the only. Accountants are the only ones who will be hired. Okay? There's the only. The subject term follows. So you will say this. All those who will be hired. And you know, you tweak the language a little bit. This says the only ones who will be hired. You're saying all those who... Oops. Okay, let me erase that. All those who will be hired are accountants. Okay, and there again, there's your quantifier, here's your subject, here's your copula, and there's your predicate class, okay? So accountants are the only ones who will be hired. Subject follows that. You turn it into universal. Notice these here with these exclusive. You turn these into universals. Okay, we did that with the conditional. The same goes here. So accountants are the only ones who will be hired. You can put that into a categorical proposition. All those who will be hired, because the subject term follows the only, are accountants. Okay, so that concludes section 4.7, and hopefully you have a better idea now how to translate an ordinary statement you can make into an A, E, I, or O, and then all the things that Aristotle learned about the inferences, immediate inferences, things you could do with categorical propositions, they now can pertain and apply to your ordinary statements because they have been converted. So here's a little bit of relevancy. You can just talk normal like and then get it into these clear, unambiguous categorical propositions, and then Aristotle in a sense has a lot of goodies for you now. There's things you can do. Okay, we'll end this one. We'll go to the next video, which will be starting chapter